Welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be doing this session together with you. As you can see, I'm sitting against a black background. I'm going to be giving a quick introduction to the core concepts of Doughnut Economics. And I decided, rather than show slides again, I wanted to do it in a more playful festival style way. So I'm going to do it visually. So I'm going to give a quick overview of 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. Here we go. First of all, the first thing you do not need is one of these, because 21st century economics does not start with calculations, equations, and maths. That's not where we begin. We begin with our eyes, the way we see the world, the images and the models that we put in front of ourselves that deeply influence what we see and what we don't see, what we put at the center of our vision, what we leave at the periphery, or what we leave off the screen altogether. So I'm going to tell you the story of 7 ways to think in images. The first way to think like a donut 21st century economist is to change the goal, to let go of the 20th century goal of the shape of progress being endless growth, this exponential curve shape going, not just stopping up in the air, but going up, up, up through the ceiling endlessly, because that's what exponentials do. The 20th century concept was that we could measure economic success with GDP, gross national product. And this would be a good enough sign of an economy success. No matter how rich an economy already is, the idea that its success lies in yet more growth, and you hear this in the speeches of politicians and the advice of economists, that the solution to our problems, even if we are sitting in the richest countries in the world, the solutions to our problems lies in yet more growth. There's something insane and ultimately impossible about that. So let's leave behind the pursuit of endless growth and replace it with thriving in balance. For this, a donut-shaped compass can accompany us, right? And the goal here is very simple. Leave no one in the hole, falling short on the essentials of life, but don't overshoot the limits of our life-supporting systems of our planetary home. So we need to thrive between the social foundation and the ecological ceiling. And this notion of thriving in balance, not endless growth, but thriving, of course, goes back in indigenous cultures a long way. It is at the heart of an indigenous worldview, living in balance with the rest of the living world. And in each one of us knows it in our own bodies. Health lies in balance in the human body. Can we take that to an understanding of health lying in balance in the planetary body, so that we have a donut-shaped picture that says, leave no one in the hole, falling short on these essentials of life, and these 12 dimensions of the social foundation: health, education, housing, food, income, peace, voice, equity. They come from the Sustainable Development Goals, which means all the governments in the world have already agreed that every person in the world has a right not to be left in this hole. So leave no one in the hole. But as we seek to meet our needs and our wants, we risk collectively overshooting these 9 planetary boundaries that give us the unique stability of life on this planet, a stable climate, fertile soils, abundant biodiversity, recharging fresh water, a protective ozone layer overhead. We'd be crazy to kick ourselves out of this thriving space of balance. But of course, that is exactly what we are doing. So how do we turn our story around and start to come back within planetary boundaries while meeting the needs of all people at the same time? If you were teaching economics and wanting to turn that story around, what would be the first and biggest picture of the economy that you would teach? Well, the 20th century picture. And here we need the second way of thinking to see the big picture, because in the 20th century, the biggest picture of the economy that was taught focused on the circulation of money, the flow of money going round and round in the economy, and then goods and resources in exchange. Very clever diagram, quite useful for a war economy, but deeply flawed, because it ultimately presents the economy as if it's a piece of perpetual piping, plumbing that goes around and around. This is impossible. Because what does it take to make resources go round and around? It takes energy. We need to put the recognition of the power of energy and life at the heart of our economies. No economy is a self-perpetuating, perpetual motion machine. We need to think again. And so a new diagram for the biggest picture of the economy is called the embedded economy diagram. And we start like this, recognizing that the economy is a subset of society. It is a social construct. We invented it and we can reinvent it. And it's embedded in social systems like political, legal, and cultural institutions. And human society is embedded in the rest of the living world. We are a part of nature and deeply dependent upon the web of life. We are bathed in a river of solar energy. There's the second law of thermodynamics. Welcome to entropy. We draw in material and matter into the economy. We put out waste and pollution. And therefore, the first requirement of an economy that belongs on this planet is that it works with and within the cycles of the living world. It respects the conditions that create conditions conducive to life. But then let's look inside the economy and recognize, okay, there's the market where most economics begins, and there's the state. And the 20th century economic debate got caught in an ideological boxing match between these two. Are you a free market, laissez-faire capitalist, or are you a state-loving socialist? And you've got to choose. In that ideological boxing match, economists lost sight of two other fundamental ways that we provision for our needs and wants. The household, where we all begin every day with our families, as parents, as children, as partners, as carers, doing the cooking, washing, the cleaning, the sweeping, raising the next generation of kids, getting labor fresh and ready for work every day to go to work in the market or the state, all underpinned by unpaid caring work in the household. But also the commons, where we come together, not through the market or the state, but as a community, collaborating, co-creating services and goods that we value, often with no money changing hands. So these four fundamental ways that we provision for our needs and wants, each bring unique contributions, but no one of them should overwhelm or crowd out space for the rest. And then looking right inside, in the center, we have here financial flows. Just imagine if finance actually was a service, financial services in service to the provisioning through these four means, in service to life, human well-being, and the thriving of the whole planet. That will be a very, very different financial system from the one we have today. So a big picture that always recognizes the economy in context and recognizes our many means of provisioning. These provide us big clues to how we can reinvent our economies. Third way to think, who are we? Humanity. How do we see ourselves in the economic story? Well, let's go back to Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and up to Milton Friedman. Economists over the centuries have created images of humanity, a model of man at the heart of economic theory, who's ended up being called rational economic man. He's always described in equations, in a set of attributes, but I think he deserves a portrait of his own. So here he is. Rational economic man. He would be a man with no dependence. He stands alone with money in his hand. That's the way he interacts with the world. He's got ego in his heart, self-interest. He's got a calculator in his head and nature at his feet. He hates work. He loves luxury and he knows the price of everything. And the real problem with this character is not just how absurdly narrow he is. It's what looking at him does to us, because you see, the more that we are told that he is like us, we actually become like him. Studies have shown that economic students from year 1 to year 2 to year 3, they more say they value self-interest over altruism. They more value competition over collaboration. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. We need a far richer portrait of humanity, of ourselves, if we're to thrive, 8 billion of us here together on this planet. And so instead, well, the model I need is simply us here, community, in relation, the multitude of people and our relatedness. We are the most social of all mammals. We have an ability to share, cooperate, cue, gift, empathize, care, far beyond our next of kin, to cooperate and collaborate with those we've never met, just as we're doing in making this day happen. So we need to nurture the best of human nature and put that full pro-social richness of our character at the heart of our economic systems. The fourth way to think like a 21st century economist, number 4, how do we think the economy actually works? Now, if we adopt the 20th century models and think of the economy in a rather mechanistic way, controlled, piping, enclosed, then we might come at it a bit like a mechanic, trying to make mechanical interventions to change the flow of things. This ain't going to work, because the economy is not controlled and utterly predictable and does not work in a mechanistic way. The economy is a complex, adaptive system, and we can't control that. It's got feedback loops and tipping points and unpredictable behavior that you don't know is going to happen. But what we can do is seek to understand it and seek to be good stewards of this system. Can we steward it and try to shape its dynamics so that they serve our goals? So if we can be stewards, more like gardeners than mechanics, what direction would we want to steward the economy in? And the 5th way is to create the economy to be distributive by design, because we have inherited economies that are divisive by design. They capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few. Did you know that over the last decade, the number of billionaires in the world has more than doubled, from 1,000 billionaires to 2,000 billionaires? And the richest 1% of the people in the world own half of the world's wealth. There's absolutely no way that humanity can live and thrive in the donut in such an extraordinarily unequal world within and between nations. So we need to take this deeply divisive economy, divisive because of privilege, inheritance, regulation, power. We need to turn that divisive economy into one that is far more distributive by design, so that we share value and opportunity that's created with all who co-create it. And that turns out to be the whole of society. We can create far, far more distributive economies, because inequality is not a law of economics. It's a design choice, a design fault, and we can overcome it. As well as changing from divisive to distributive, the 6th way to think like a 21st century economist recognizes that we've inherited deeply degenerative economies. We take Earth's materials, we stick them in the pipe of production, we transform it into stuff, we use it often only once, and then we just throw it away out the end of the pipe. And this linear degenerative system is running down the living world. It is pushing us over planetary boundaries. We need to turn that linear degenerative global economy that we've created into a regenerative, cyclical, circular one, so that resources aren't used up, they're used again and again, far more carefully, more collectively, more creatively, and more slowly. And of course, this way of living, a return to the cycles of the earth, lies at the heart of indigenous culture and community and lifestyle forever. Can we relearn it and return to? So from divisive to distributive, from degenerative to regenerative, if we're going to change the deep dynamics of our economies, we need to change the design of our institutions too. And this comes from the thinker Marjorie Kelly. So whether you're talking about an enterprise or a government or an NGO or a foundation or a university or a club, any organization, think about 5 deep design traits. What is the purpose of this organization? Why does it even exist in the world? What are its networks of relationship with your employees or staff or your members, your customers, your suppliers, all the relations you hold? How do you live out your values in those relations? Are they extractive or collaborative? How is this organization governed? Who's in the room when decisions get made? Who actually has voice in those decisions? Does nature have a voice? Do future generations have a voice? Do all those affected have a voice? What are the metrics of success? How is this organization owned Who owns the critical sources of wealth that it stewards? And ultimately, how it's owned is going to have a big say over how it's financed. Where does the finance behind this organization come from? And therefore, what is that finance expecting? What is it extracting? And what is it reinvesting in your purpose? So behind the desire to transform the dynamics of our economies lies the deep design of organizations. And we need to transform the design of our organizations if we are going to transform the dynamics that they can actually bring about in the world. So to get into the donut, we want to become regenerative and distributive. This takes us back to the seventh and final way to think like a 21st century economist. Takes us back to that old story of growth, because 20th century economists have left us flying off into the sunset of mass consumerism, pursuing endless growth. Indeed, not just pursuing it, addicted to it. Our economies have become structurally dependent, politically, financially, and socially, on endless growth. And let's recognize that growth is a wonderful, healthy phase of life. That's why we love to see our kids grow. We love to see our gardens grow. But nothing in nature succeeds by trying to grow forever. It will destroy itself or the system on which it depends. And in our own bodies, we call that cancer. Things that survive and thrive and endure in nature don't try to grow forever. They go through the growth phase, and with a flick of a wrist, they grow up, they mature, and that is what enables them to survive and thrive. So can we bring this shape into our economies? Can we create economies that grow and then grow up and mature and thrive? Can we remove the structural dependency on endless growth that is currently written into our economies? And this is an immediate challenge, especially for the world's richest and most resource-using countries. That's the existential 21st century question about growth. So there is a whirlwind overview of 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist. And when I wrote Doughnut Economics, I said, there will be more ways. There will be an 8th, 9th, 10th way. And I think the 8th way has revealed itself already. I think the 8th way to think like a 21st century economist is to try to put it into practice, because we will learn the most through trying things out and seeing what happens. I actually profoundly believe that 21st century economics is going to be practiced first and theorized later, which is why we co-founded Deal, to put these ideas into action and ask what happens, what has traction, what takes off, what gets resistance, what works, how will things be designed and owned, how will things be distributed between the market, the state, the household, and the commons? How can we redesign economies to be in service to life? So with that overview, I want to hand over to you to dive into this 8th way. What have you been learning as you attempting to put these ideas into practice, whether it's in the classroom or in your community, in a business, in your city, in your neighborhood? What are you learning in the process of what it means to actually bring these ideas into practice? We're going to invite you to jump into breakout rooms and share back your learning with each other so that we can all learn this together.
Great. Well, hello, everybody. I guess we'll give another few moments while people are coming back in. And then the next part of the session is to spend a few minutes just for any questions or things that we wanted to present to Kate or to speak about over the next little bit, or things that may have come up during your discussion. So we'll open that up in just a few seconds. Well, very good. I guess we will just jump right in then for this next part of the session, which is to have a bit of questions and answers and discussion and connection here with all of you who are joining in this conversation. So I'm mainly just playing a role of pulling out questions as they come up. So I will do so. Please, if you have questions, use the question and answer box, which you can see enabled in the Zoom function at the bottom. And with that, I will just jump in, choosing ones as we go, and let's make a conversation. So thanks, Kate from Ezra Tat. In your perspective, what are the main top 3 challenges to mainstream deal and how to overcome them? Thank you.
Oh, thanks. Hi, and thanks, Ezra. Let's start with the big questions then. I'm going to guess that you mean mainstreaming Doughnut Economics as opposed to the organization. So what are the big 3 challenges to mainstreaming this way of thinking? Whew. Well, the first challenge I'm going to say is the one that motivated me to write the book, is just the economic mindset, the way of thinking that keeps on getting taught and is still taught so prevalently in universities around the world, just with the unquestioned presumption that growth is feasible, that it's desirable, that it's possible, that we can measure the economy in GDP terms and monetary metrics, and that the environment is an add-on. You can do an optional paper in environmental economics if you want to. So to me, that mindset is really problematic, because it just keeps creating generation after generation raised within that same worldview. A second one would be finance, the design of finance. So as I said, you know, what would it mean if finance was actually in service to society? I mean, finance is what underpins this growth curve, isn't it? It's finance currently is designed to seek to accumulate endlessly. That's what we call capital. And much of the world's systems are designed to enable that to happen. So it's the pursuit of endless growth, and it's the idea that money is designed to find a return for itself. And I think that just runs directly into contradiction and into challenge with life, which regenerates and regenerates system-wide and doesn't seek to accumulate endlessly. So I think there's so much to be redone around redesigning finance so that it's actually in service to living systems rather than in service to itself. And then the third one, I mentioned some of the lock-ins to endless growth, and I actually feel that the geopolitics or the geopolitical lock-in that we face is a really big one. So I often say, you know, no government wants to lose their place in the G20 family photo. And if one country stopped trying to keep growing endlessly, they would risk not only being booted out by the next emerging economic powerhouse, but also risk their geopolitical influence and position in the world. And this one just keeps coming back to me more and more because of the geopolitical tensions in the world, the chase of resources, the search to control resources, and the tensions rising between rising powers means it's not going to be quick and easy that governments let go of that pursuit of power and growth to have geopolitical positioning in the world. So we see the rise of things like the well-being economy governments, a few governments that go off and pursue something different, pursue well-being, but it's very much still an outlying group. And so this one keeps me awake at night.
Great, thanks so much. I will then just jump on to the next one because that's great. So we got a couple questions around Doughnut Economics, links with degrowth, and around the questions of green growth and all of that. So how does Doughnut Economics link with degrowth? Is a question from Luis Palicio.
Great
Thanks.
question. So degrowth, right? So let's define our terms. If I listen to people like Jason Hickel or Tim Parikh, what is degrowth? The way I hear them define it, degrowth is a planned reduction in the less necessary production or consumption, the production or consumption of less necessary goods, so that we come back within planetary boundaries and achieve social justice in a democratic way. So if I just hold up the donut, right, these are pretty closely related, right? The aim to come back within the donut is very closely related to that definition of degrowth. Degrowth specifies a particular means of going about doing it. Very, very closely related. So I would say they are very closely related. One of the main things that differs is the name. And degrowth as a phrase, as a name, as a meme, as a concept has become incredibly powerful in inspiring and mobilizing a generation of academic thinkers, young people mobilizing, activists, and it's brilliant for that. There's also another group of people who aren't mobilized by it, who may intentionally or unintentionally misunderstand what it means and think it means make GDP go down. And often on talk radio, you get people intentionally trying to mislabel it that way. So I think there's a real value of having different ways of talking about similar goals. And so Doughnut Economics aims to talk about an extremely similar goal for countries worldwide using a different language so that people can come to this conversation in a language that appeals to them, that mobilizes them and motivates them. But I have to say that today there's going to be a session of Andrew in conversation with Tim Parikh. Andrew, why don't you just jump in right now and talk about that? Because anyone who's interested in degrowth should definitely be part of that session.
Sure. So we're going to be having at 7:30 UK time, 8:30 Europe time. It's going to be a conversation between myself and Tim Parikh. Tim Parikh is an ecological economist who's been very active, writing about degrowth, writing about the need for a post-growth economy and all of this stuff. I'm super excited that he is going to be joining us, and I invite all of you to come to that session where we will be discussing specifically around the questions of green growth. How can we transform? What is needed? And diving deep into that topic.
I'll just add before we move on, one thing that, again, I think is deeply aligned between Doughnut Economics and degrowth is the view based on empirical evidence so far that the scale of decoupling that would be required in high-income countries today is just not on the cards. In fact, let me just see if I can do a very quick demo of this, right? If this blue pipe is GDP, right? What countries have always wanted, like 3.5%, please, or 2.5% continual growth. There we are. It's so determined it can just do it on its own. So we need resources to come down, way down, not just flatten out, because at the moment we've got resource use has been rising. That's still coupled. We need resource use, like not just carbon emissions, but material use as well, not just domestically, but consumption based, to flatten out. And that would be called absolute decoupling. GDP still rising and resource use flattening out. But just flattening out or coming down a little bit is not enough. And that's what most high-income countries have achieved in terms of their carbon emissions. Many have, and we all should congratulate it. We all should celebrate that some high-income countries have reduced their consumption-based carbon emissions. But just a little bit of a reduction is nothing close to what we need, because we need to come back within planetary boundaries. So we need this to really fall much further and much faster than it is. If this yellow pipe, this is the real imperative. This is the planet's life support systems. This is the one we must make sure happens. And there's no evidence so far that this can happen at the speed and scale. It's not yet happening. If we continue to insist on 2.5% growth every year. So this is where degrowth and Doughnut Economics deeply agree that this is what needs to transform, end the structural dependency on endless growth. And then it becomes a really open question. Do we just have slower rate of growth, or almost go to a steady state that Herman Daly advocated? Does GDP need to go down for some period before it comes up again? There are many, many views on this. I think, to me, the strongest view is no one knows exactly what's possible. But if we don't know, it means we need to end the structural dependency that's currently written into GDP. And that's a very strong connection between Doughnut Economics and degrowth.
I'm very much in hand with what you've just done, Kate. There is a very good question here from Eric about the emphasis on visual models to communicate and think about economics. So they're asking, could you go a bit more in detail of how you see those visualizations play a role in spreading Doughnut Economics and opening it up for people without a specific academic background and their contributions?
Oh, thanks, Carolina. That's a great question, one very close to my own heart, because I've always loved doodling. When I was a student, I would doodle. When I worked at Oxfam, I would sort of doodle, draw things. And it was before people, before we had the language of saying there are different kinds of intelligence and there are different ways of knowing and learning. And I realize now it's a visual intelligence, and I like to understand things visually first. When I drew the donut diagram, I was initially just doodling, and I actually stuck it in the bottom drawer of my desk for about 6 months before people said, no, we should publish this. And it's just a diagram. If you took any of these words and wrote them in a list, I don't think anybody would have blinked. But the fact that they're placed into concentric circles in tension with one another. This is doing some visual work. And I was amazed by the traction that this image had when it was published in 2012. And that's what set me off in exploring the power of visual thinking. And I learned that our visual cortex is literally in the back of the head. So images go in through our eyes. We don't interrogate them in the way that we've been taught to analyze and critique and interrogate words. That's a very academic training. Images almost slip past that defense mechanism. They slip into the back of our head and sit there literally for decades without us remembering they're there. But they are, and they shape what we put at the center of our vision and what we leave on the periphery. So they profoundly influence everything that follows. And when I discovered this, I went back to my old economics textbooks. They're down there. I went back and started flicking through the pages and seeing these pictures coming out of, there was no image of the living world. Everything was supply and demand and growth. And so I realized if we're going to rewrite the economic mindset, we have to tap into those pictures that are embedded in the back of our minds. I think of them as intellectual graffiti. And it's really, really hard to scrub graffiti off. Often the best thing to do is paint over it with a beautiful mural. So I thought, rather than trying to eradicate those old pictures, I'm just going to paint over them with new ones. And that's why I ended up telling the story of Doughnut Economics in pictures. But to go into that question from Eric, it is, of course, a language that's much more appealing, much more accessible, much more playful to everybody. We can turn it into children's art. We can all doodle and draw our own pictures. And it very importantly says, hey, economics is not an academic expertise. That's just one way of coming at it. Everybody is part of the economy. We are all shaping it and shaped by it. And therefore, we all have a right to be in this conversation. And I think that images really make it accessible and inviting and playful to everybody. So that's a very kind of political power of pictures.
So true, so true. I have to say we have 2 more minutes. So we need to, unfortunately, we won't be able to respond to all of these wonderful questions, but I have seen a question going on from that one from Katrin. Sorry, I'm going to mess up the names. But she's asking about the role of arts and culture in Doughnut Economics. Can you say anything about the role of arts and culture?
Oh, yeah. Well, I wish our colleague Rob was here because he's our community and art lead. If you saw the presentation I gave earlier this morning, the first thing that happened when Doughnut Economics was published was people just started playing with it. People in the Netherlands made these little glasses, donut glasses for looking at the world. People started graffitiing it, drawing it on the sidewalk, sending me donut cartoons. And it was really clear that it's partly, I think, the name donut. It's so silly. Everybody knows that this is fun. And you're invited to bring all of your humor, all of your playfulness, all of your creativity. But again, it gets it into the street. In Birmingham, Civic Square have done beautiful work with kids just painting and chalking on the streets, making it feel like a conversation for all generations. But then beyond the visual as well, there are composers who've composed music to symbolize Doughnut Economics. What if we turned it into dance or theater, or we did it in knitting or crochet, song? How can we turn it into all of the ways that we traditionally celebrate and create culture and recreate it? So I think this is only just getting underway, just beginning, because the artists are starting to show up in droves, and it's going to be beautiful in the way it keeps getting remade. I call it Doughnut Economics, and of course the word economics can be intimidating to people, but if we think that economics literally means the art of household management, well, we're all involved in managing our planetary household in the interest of all of our inhabitants, and we definitely need arts and culture to make that fly.
Thank you, Kate. And just the last question before we have to wrap up. There's a question from Wildbound Beijing, and they're asking, from China, we now have more than 800 people watching this live. How many cities currently in the world are using donut theory to guide their urban development, and how widely is it being used and practiced, especially in the production of the economy?
Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Carolina. Hello to everybody at Wildbound in China and everybody all around the world. It's a real thrill for us that you are joining us in Global Doughnut Day, and therefore we're joining you and learning what you're doing too. So there are over 70 local governments, meaning city governments, towns, districts, councils, states, around the world that are using the framework of Doughnut Economics in some way to reshape conversations, to reimagine their strategies, to create new decision-making tools, to monitor their transformation over the coming decades. And it's a thrill for us to see how they are turning it into a tool. We're working along with government policymakers to figure out how best to make tools that could be worked everywhere and then put those in the commons. But those, I'm just mentioning governments, right? This is where local governments are involved. There's many, many, many more community groups, households, organizations, NGOs that are turning the ideas into their own practice. And this is really at the heart of Doughnut Economics Action Lab. We've put all of these ideas in the commons because we think that is the best place for them to belong if ideas are going to spread at the scale that's required. We simply ask that people share back because we know that Doughnut Economics will be massively improved and re-inspired by what's happening in China or in Chile or in Tanzania or in Sweden or anywhere in the world. We will learn together from the great diversity of what each place is bringing to it. So please keep on sharing back. Please go to Deal's platform, add a story from today, add a story from your work. I promise you it's going to massively inspire others. And I just want to say thanks to my colleagues Andrew and Carolina and to Khan and Beth. But thank you to everybody for joining us today. It's a complete thrill for us that there's this crazy thing called Global Doughnut Day. And it's big teamwork. This exists because all of us are making it happen.
It is. It's a ridiculous thing, but at the same time, it's a beautiful thing. So let's wrap up this session so that we stay on time. Thank you so much for joining. I'm going to pass to Beth to close us out. And thanks a lot. We'll see you throughout the rest of the day.
Have a great day.